Hi, I'm Holly Howitt with Beacon Community Connections. I'm here with Heather Prejean with Acadiana's Center for Loss and Transition with Hospice of Acadiana.
I want to thank Holly for having me here. And we know that during this pandemic, there's been a lot of emotions and issues that come up, and we are here to provide support to our community. At the Center for Loss and Transition, our main focus and goal is to support people in our community who's experienced bereavement and grief based on the loss or death of a loved one and due to a major life transition. And I think a pandemic would qualify for a major life transition. And we're here to validate for you that we are all collectively feeling grief.
People are feeling any number of things right now. Is it right to call any of these things grief?
It is. We are feeling so many things right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, so many changes in our day-to-day lives, whether that's professional, personal. It feels very chaotic. It has impacted us on so many ways. Loss of employment, loss of our ability to connect, possible loss of jobs, or even in the future. I believe right now we're not sure about the future of our children and their own education. What it's been defined as is we're collectively grieving, and it's not a normal situation. We might individually feel grief, but it's an extremely unusual situation to grieve as a society.
You said that we're feeling more than one kind of grief.
We're feeling a lot of anxiety, fear, and I think most of that is because we are fearing the unknown. Anticipatory grief is a fear that we feel when we know a loss is coming. With this pandemic, we know that our future is different. We don't know in what way, and we're not sure what we're waiting for. So the anticipatory grief is a huge fear of the unknown, and we're not exactly sure what we're afraid of. We only know there is a large sense of loss when it comes to what our normalcy is. We also have a loss of a sense of safety, and that's extremely unusual for us. We may feel unsafe from time to time, but this seems to be hanging over our heads. Again, it does not feel normal. So anticipatory grief is a very common feeling that we're feeling right now.
What can individuals do to manage all this grief?
One of the points about grief we like to remind people is that grief is not linear. There's many stages of grief. For example, maybe some grief or some shock and denial. Is this actually happening? Is this truly a pandemic? How bad could it be? I think I found myself saying some of those same things. Then that can transition into some anger. Why am I having to stay home? Obviously it can transition into sadness of this is so different than what I'm used to. My norm nothing feels normal and safe anymore. And then we can transition into more of an acceptance. I will say with the bargaining as well, and that's something that I believe a lot of people have done, is it's gonna only last so long. And after 2, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, we'll be back to normal. And fast forward to today, it's lasting longer and longer than we ever expected. We're feeling the fatigue from it. And so finally we're here today and we're working on having some acceptance. If you look at the diagram, you will see that we can move through those stages, and it looks really chaotic. Because we can start with having acceptance in the morning and feel anger during the day and go back to acceptance by the evening. And that's why many times we feel fatigued, because we're moving through these stages of grief and we can move through them very quickly within one day.
When we're feeling grief, there's the physical pain and the racing mind. Are there any techniques to make this feel less intense?
There's a couple of things that we can do to make this feelings of what the anticipatory grief really brings on is anxiety and fears. And so there are some coping mechanisms that I would encourage you or anyone to use in order to help decrease some of the anxiety and fears that we're having. One of my biggest recommendations is to find some balance. There's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of questions that we have, but there are other things that we know for sure are real and true and right with the world that we're living in. So if we try and think of both of those things, make room for the things that we know are real and right, it helps us to find some balance in our thinking. Another technique is to be intentional. As a matter of fact, I've told some of my clients, make that your mantra of the day, is to be intentional with the way that you think, and to be intentional maybe with some of the activities that you're choosing to do that day. The more we're intentional, I say sometimes life is more in control of me than I'm in control of my life, and that's when I know it's time to be a little more intentional. Staying present is partly about being intentional, but we know that there will be an end and we will be a lot more settled one day. So it's important to remind ourselves, what can I do today to be present and maybe find some peace, find some calm in our day-to-day lives. Being compassionate is probably not easy, but one of the most important things during the pandemic. You'll notice a lot of people with heightened emotions. Obviously, if I'm mentioning we're grieving and we're having anxiety, our flexibility in life, we're not as flexible as we used to be. So if we're use our compassion and just meet people where they are, recognizing, they may just be having a bad day or having a little more anxiety at this moment. Things are taking a little more time for us, which means we're burning energy on rethinking and replanning. So using some compassion and recognizing that it goes a long way and actually makes for a better personal experience. The last tip I guess I would give is to remember we're not going to be perfect at this. We will try to be intentional and be mindful and present, and that may last a few minutes, and then something will just make us veer off of our course of peace and calmness, and that's okay. What I say is gently guide yourself back when you realize you're off track, and keep trying. It's a work in progress. We're not expecting perfectionism here.
One of my employees got snippy with me the other day, and I thought, that's not like this person. They're usually easygoing, but then I thought maybe that's how they're dealing with this fear and anxiety.
In talking about compassion, this is a great example of when we would want to try and be as compassionate as we can, and recognizing we're all weighted with grief and anxiety. And even if we're not having a heavy grief day and we're not feeling huge anxiety, our world is still changed, and that causes a bit of stress. And with it layered, having the pandemic, that might change the way we do things at work, and we're taking extra time to rethink and replan and figure out new responses based on the pandemic. So being compassionate with, we'll say, disgruntled or people who are not in the best mood, if we use a little bit of compassion, it'll go a long way.
What do you say to someone who's watched this video and read some information and is still feeling overwhelmed with grief?
I would make sure that we all understood emotions need motion. David Kessler says if we can name it, then we can manage it. And one of the important things about grief and acceptance is to be able to say, this is grief, I'm grieving, and that's okay. Whether it's grief, anxiety, fear, if we're naming it and understanding what we're feeling, then it brings us to a space of acceptance. And sometimes we just have to sit there and say, this is what I'm feeling, and work through the emotion. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. We're not required to be perfect at this. We have to remember to keep trying. Some days we'll be better at it than others, and that's okay.
Thanks so much, Heather, for all that great information. You gave us a lot of information to think about and reflect on. Are there any resources or any final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'd like to say thank you for having us, and thank you for giving me the time to talk about grief and really validate us as a community that we are in fact feeling some of the grief and anxiety that this pandemic has brought on. I would like to tell people that Acadiana Center for Loss and Transition is a resource for you. We do have virtual support groups. We are able to do the telehealth. We are actually allowing people to come in for individual sessions with all of the safety precautions taken because of the pandemic. But I want you to know you're not alone. And we have partnerships with other resources as well. We have Maddie's Footprints, we have Healing House, and we also have Compassionate Friends. And they're all focused on grief and bereavement and are there to give you support if you should need that support. So I want you to reach out if you should need, and know that we're here.
So Heather, what's the phone number or website where people can get more information about your services?
Sure. Our phone number is 337-889-5369, and our website is hospiceacadiana.com, or you can also email me at hprejean@hospiceacadiana.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Holly.